Hey you! Yes, you, watching this video. Do you want to own a piece of Scribbler? Only not a lock of hair or blood or flesh or anything else that will get you in trouble with the law? Well, now you can, with t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags and mugs featuring Obab Scribbler at her Teespring store. You know you want to. I shall now stop talking in third person and send you on to the video. Be lovely to each other and enjoy the show.
Ponytails. Read by Scribbler.
To Mayor Mare, Ponyville City Hall fixture. From Applejack, proprietress, Sweet Apple Acres Farm and Marina. Dear Mayor Mare, it was with no small amount of disappointment that we received your newest letter of sympathy, Madam Mayor. While your elocution was as sharp as ever, you could say we was looking for something a bit more practical to arrive from your office. Something along the lines of, say, a bucket. As you will recall, Madam Mayor, my recent spate of frenzy letter writing to your most gilded office concerns a bit of governmental constipation. I'll herein repeat my story, in case you were simply using the old rubber stamp for the 3 previous occasions. It seems that our local government, under your rather inebriated leadership, had a variety of intercurricular activities coming about simultaneously and at the same time. The first was the yearly teaching of the local baby beaver population how to build dams. This activity is so sweet to behold, it requires the presence of a certified dentist and results in a yearly run on the diabetes testing supplies at Mortar and Pestle's pharmacy. Of course, it was led, as it is every year, by my dear friend Fluttershy. She did her utmost and best to pursue the situation professionally, whilst blushing fiercely at the driest of Ponyville wits, stood around and made munchin' beaver jokes. The second was an outing of the first years of Celestia's School for Gifted Unicorns, which was led by another dear friend of mine, our local designate, Twilight Sparkle. Twilight, being Twilight, was so thorough in her explanation of the local flora, fauna, and magica of the surrounding environment that she failed to note that her little scholars were at the very living bleeding age of their rapidly departing attention spans. They had, in point of fact, begun to rapidly take on the appearance of those on a death march rather than a field trip. The third occurrence, which conspired to result in my current sodden situation, was the testing by our local Pegasi of their no-rain production techniques. I did raise my concerns about having such experimental variables so close to the farm, but my close friend Rainbow Dash assured me that they had everything under control, and that it was all cool, and that I needed to chill out and chillax. I immediately informed her that this went south in a hurry, she'd need to call a proctologist so that she could once again fly straight. With these facts well in hoof, we, the residents of a decidedly unflooded and relatively dry and not in any way damp Sweet Apple Acres farm, watched as the following events transpired. First of all, the baby beavers commenced to build their very first itty-bitty cutesy-wootsy dams as the blood sugar levels of the onlookers rose, and our most proficient comedians continued to make off-color jokes. Secondly, Twilight consented to allow the students from the School for Gifted Unicorns 5 minutes to watch the saccharine exhibition. What Twilight failed to account for, as she frantically raced to adjust her schedule, was that her young charges, being bored, simply then began testing out their meager magical abilities on the little rodents. As we looked on, the beavers began growing, with the assistance of various and sundry magical incantations, to many times their typical size. One of the immediate implications of such was that they immediately began constructions of new dams to hold their most appreciable girth. This was of immediate concern to myself, as the most readily available source of lumber was my dang apple trees. Yes, ma'am, as I have told you in my 2 previous letters, the beavers ripped my trees right out of the ground, clean as a whistle, shore off the branches, and commenced to partake of engineering with them. As I began calculating the amount of bits I was going to have to report to the insurance company, the impeccable jesters of Ponyville began making big beaver jokes as the crowd groaned. Then, much to our relief, the rodents gathered up said comedians and made them structural elements of the new construction, much to the applause, relief, and cheer of those gathered. Now, there was a storm brewing, and not just the one indicated by my rising blood pressure. Overhead, a great black thundercloud was commencing to gather itself up as the Pegasi commenced with the experimenting. Now, understandably, our dear Pegasus friends were very happy with themselves. I'm not one to go casting disparages, but I could not help but feel that our friends went a little overboard when they began to attempt to build what could only be described as an epic rain cloud. Seriously, Madam Mayor, the thing was so awful huge it covered all the Sweet Apple Acres in a kind of hovering menace. It was thick, palpable, filling us all almost as full of fear and apprehension as my brother Big Mike gets whenever he sees a mare walking up the road to the farm with a baby carriage. And what? This big black cloud hangs there until the precipitation starts in with its precipitating. Oh, cold howdy, how it came down. The drops came faster than the sweat that pours off a Big Mac when he sees... Oh, but I repeat myself. Now, being that we are a farm, rain is most often viewed by us here at Sweet Apple Acres as largely beneficial, and we are happy for it. All of this would have been fine and dandy if it weren't for the fact that some pony among the first years of the unicorns had seen fit to try out a spell that made things slightly more impervious to disassembly than one might expect. I can fix it, called Twilight over and over as she put her horn to summoning all sorts of spells and incantations, as unicorns are oft wont to do. Despite my hopes to the contrary, the accumulating evidence was that she, despite her best efforts, couldn't. The newly inflated beavers continued the enlargifying of the now impervious dams at a startling rate, despite Fluttershy's implores for them to stop. I felt my eye begin to twitch when it became rather obvious that the Pegasi weren't having much more luck keeping their big old cloud under control. Despite her assurances that everything was fine and cool, I could clearly see Dash making mental preparations for a doctor's visit. So, Mayor Mare, as the sun set and my friends all tried to go about rectifying the situation, all we could do was gather up whatever bit of our meager belongings we could find and tie up the farm as best we could as the puddles began to get deeper. I have always wanted to live in a nice spot with a waterfront view, but I've always wanted to keep the farm in the family as well. To my disappointment, the following morning showed me just how incompatible these conflicting visions of my real estate ventures truly were. During the night, the rain cloud had kept deluging the farm with water. A now very tired-looking Pegasi fluttered all around, blaming various atmospheric conditions and using rather colorful language, wincing a bit when I gave him a good hard stare. All around my little white farmhouse stood an expansive lake where Sweet Apple Acres farm had once stood. We'd been deluged. As my family all stood around with blank expressions, we watched as the ephemera of our farm began to float about. Atop the waters, we could see the bobbing of hay bales, apple crates, and the occasional perturbed-looking sheep. We began to take stock of the situation. Twilight continued running back and forth, insisting that she knew what to do. Fluttershy called to the decidedly unimpressed-looking beavers, and dashed hid behind a cloud. To our immense relief, our milking cows were all safely atop the milk shed, and appeared at the time to be very well organized to deal with the situation as they saw it. Flossie, indeed, seemed to be conducting some sort of democratically inspired proceedings to get the bovines through the present crisis. At the East Barn, things weren't going nearly so well. Our farm hoof Caramel somehow had found himself lodged there during the night, and had awoken in a sodden state. He danced about the top of the barn, calling for help as the structure itself was slowly circled by very hungry-looking beavers. We waved to Caramel and yelled to him that we knew he would do his best. When he started to cry, we slowly walked to the other side of the porch. It was at this juncture that I thought it best to contact your office, Madam Mayor. When the stallion from the Disaster Management Bureau arrived, Big Mac paddled out to him, carefully avoiding the sheep, and fetched him up from over across the way where we'd hung a marina notice underneath the Sweet Apple Acres farm sign. As Big Mac rode the representative over to the house, Caramel crying for help in the distance, the large fellow began to show a bit of mirth. "Ahoy, Apple family," called the corpulent pony as he neared the house. "Permission to come aboard." My Granny Smith then proceeded to ask him into which of his orifices he liked one of the examples of our last apple crop to find a safe harbor. He became decidedly more professional following that. We were informed that there were several exploratory committees beginning the process of considering ways to start the possible remediation of our situation. "These things take time," he said, gulping slightly as he watched Granny Smith continue to roll an apple back and forth beneath her hoof. Seeing the bureaucrat off the property, Big Mac returned just as Celestia's sun was setting, and we, the residents of the SS farmhouse, looked out over the waste that was once our farm. As Caramel's cries continued to float out over Lake Sweet Apple, the cows closed the executive session of their parliament and began to bed down for the night. We did the same, hoping that the morrow would bring some sort of respite from our troubles. The next day began with Big Mac fishing Ditsy Doo, our Mayor Mare with whom you've been familiarized, out of the waters very near where our mailbox stood in a submerged state. As we looked over the applications for boat storage, we noticed the second reply to our implores for help from your office. Couldn't help but notice, Madam Mayor, that it was pretty much the exact same letter you sent the previous day. We took a look over the situation once more. What met our eyes was about as comforting and inspiring as hoof and mouth disease. In the far distance, Twilight still sat on the embankment of the beaver dam, drooling slightly as she cast spells, seemingly at random. She was still mouthing, "I can fix it," wordlessly as objects and individuals, some seemingly torn unaware from various activities ranging from professional to romantic in nature, were seemingly summoned to our farm/marina in a flash of her magic and dropped into the cold waters with little regard for their state of awareness of the situation. Not too far from that, Fluttershy, herself looking more than a little flustered, attempted to avoid the plummeting ponies and various ephemera our friend was unintentionally calling out of their daily lives and into our cold and wet reality. As she did, she still attempted to call out to the beavers in the most adorable display of uselessness I'd personally ever witnessed. The beavers themselves were a bit occupied at that moment, you see. They had begun an assault on my east barn, apparently intent on using it as a basic resource for the erecting of some kind of warren. As they gnawed on its timbers, Caramel ran back and forth across the roof using a tennis racket that Twilight's magic had materialized in his presence to attempt to dissuade the rather unimpressed appearing rodents from disassembling his place of employment. Over at the milk shed, things were going swimmingly, to turn a phrase. The cows had now outlined the basic form that their republic would take, and were now moving on to basic constitutional liberties and term limits. We all stood and saluted as their flag went up, trying to be neighborly and the like. We did our best to sing along with their national anthem, but not knowing the words, we all ended up just singing whatever the hell we felt like singing. We would have listened harder, but now the cursing and sounds of annoyance the Pegasi overhead had reached a state that I felt the need to cover Apple Bloom's ears against the tirades. As I looked up to the Pegasi, all of them kicking, biting, or verbally berating the big old black rain cloud, I could not help but notice Dash tip hoofing through the air from cloud to cloud to avoid my gaze. As I was envisioning the medical pony of her choice fetching an array of objects from her innards, I heard a most amazing noise. The four of us turned to look up the path that led to the marina, or farm. There, shining in the noontime sun, came an entire regiment of equestrian army engineers. Their armor shone brightly, and the sun reflected off of their axes and shovels. How proud they appeared as their colonel looked upon our forlorn state. How heroic the army appeared as their flags crested the earthworks of the beaver dam. How gallant the army looked as they surveyed the scene. What jerks they looked as they did an about-face and went off to fetch the Navy. About this time, my good friends Pinkie Pie and Rarity arrived. They had spent the previous day gathering up some consumables and basic needs for our use, and now Rarity levitated them to us with her magic. Pinkie, on the other hand, had brought her water wings and was splashing about in Lake Sweet Apple before too long. Almost instantly, she had even begun to gather up some of the random objects, bits of detritus, a sheep or two, and confused ponies that were bobbing about to build herself a private island. It was with no small amount of disappointment that we had to inform her that the more earthy bits of her little atoll were, in reality, the contents of our manure pile from the pig shed. With that, a rather defeated look crossed her face, and as she squished across her compost-based outlet, it made rather unpleasant noises. With that, she jumped back into the water and swam to the milk shed. Much to our pleasure, she was greeted as the first tourist to visit their little republic and was given the full tour. This consisted of, as best we could see, getting to see the quilt Bessie was working on and getting a 4-hour explanation of how Lily's gout was clearing up. Much to Apple Bloom's relief, Rarity, who had arrived at the scene utterly bestrewn with waiters and impedimenta to avoid contact with the copious amounts of mud that had bestrewn the sodden shore of our new lake, had brought her sister Sweetie Belle with her. Apple Bloom had grown quite tired of playing with us, as her constant and uninterrupted victory streak over myself and our word games had caused my blood pressure to rise even further. I, too, was happy that she'd have some pony else to talk with. After about 12 seconds of them yelling back and forth across the detritus-strewn waters at the top of their lungs, my eye was twitching again, and my last few nerves were fraying. Even though it did drown out Caramel's battle cries and the near-constant stream of profanity from the Pegasi overhead, it weren't exactly the most soothing of cacophonies. I suggested that Rarity use her magic to levitate Sweetie Belle over to us. The unicorn at first looked doubtful, but as the little fillies jumped around in excitement, she consented to the plan and ignited her horn. She did a fine job navigating Sweetie Belle for the most part. Good old Rarity. She deftly avoided the objects and ponies the withdrawn and drooling figure of distant Twilight was still unintentionally summoning and dropping into Lake Sweet Apple. Oh, Celestia, why, called a Royal Guard's pony as he flashed into our presence, Rarity moving Sweetie in a swirl of purple magic to avoid him. His expression fell from stoic to flabbergasted in an instant as he splashed down into the cold waters. Rarity spun Sweetie to avoid another obstacle as it too joined our little sopping wet assemblage. Oh no, not again, called a bowl of petunias as it plummeted into the waters, much to the amazement and confusion of all the ponies there gathered. As Sweetie crossed over to us, her giggling became most melodic, and the sun shone behind her. She appeared as a little white cherub as she wafted over the shimmering surface of the waters, her happy laughter making the scene almost angelic in nature. This lasted until the storm cloud, reacting to the biting and cursing of the Pegasi who were working it toward its destruction, unleashed a single bolt of lightning and a crack of thunder. This had the immediate effect of making Rarity lose her concentration, and sending Sweetie Belle falling face first into Pinky's recently vacated fertilizer-based island. She landed with an indecent-sounding plump, and black waters were seen to ooze about her. "Sweetie, darling," cried Rarity, beset with horror, "do not, under any circumstances, lick your lips." After Big Mac had fetched Sweetie Belle in the boat, we did our darndest to clean her off. As we set about preparing dinner from the supplies Rarity and Pinky had brought, we looked out over the scene before us at the sunset. Out upon the shores of the Milkshed Republic, their guest Pinkie Pie had taken it upon herself to help the bovines develop something approaching a cultural identity. As she led them in the dance of their people, the constant rattling and crashing of their hooves upon the tin roof of the milkshed went like little nails directly behind my eyes. With that, however, one of the tin panels gave way, sending a few of the cows crashing through it into the stalls below. This had the singular effect, setting off the young democracy's first constitutional crisis, as it were. While this was happening, Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle, who had already bored one another with their word games, began experimenting with a few of the more colorful adjectives, verbs, and nouns that the Pegasi overhead had been using throughout the disaster as it had unfolded. I informed them that good little fillies don't use such language, that the acts they had described were either physically impossible or horribly overpriced, and that I thought it was best that they now found themselves some sleeping arrangements. While they were disappointed to have to go to bed, it did save them from having to witness the horror of what seemed to be the final act of Caramel's day-long battle with the impossibly enlarged beavers. As the sun set, its light did but shine through the tattered remains of the east barn. Caramel, perched atop the weather vane, took a few final swipes with the tennis racket as the mother beaver, her teeth massive and white, reached up to claim him. As the sun set, we heard only Caramel's final cries, and Granny Smith, Big Mac, and I stood and saluted as the darkness rolled in. With that, we shed a tear in his memory and discussed what attributes we'd be looking for in the next veilhoof we'd be hiring before we headed up to bed. Before I conclude with that day's events, Madam Mayor, I want you to know something about me. I am a rather honest pony, and I'll not be lying to you. I am afraid. I am afraid of what's going to happen to my farm. What's going to happen to all of us. These fears gnawed at me as I tried to sleep last night. Farming is an occupation that pays. It pays the seed growers. It pays the co-op. It pays the bank that holds the mortgage. When my parents... When I took possession of the farm, we had to take out a mortgage. Between Granny Smith's retirement money, Big Mac's army pension, and all of our hard work, we were making it work. When we took out the mortgage, we financed it by the square foot. If I were to have to try again today, it'd have to be by the quart. In your second letter, you asked how the crops would be affected. If I could find where they all floated off to, I'd be happy to let you know. Next year, I intend to plant watercress and watermelons, so I'm suggesting you adjust your diet accordingly. The next morning began with Big Mac once again fetching the soap form doo out of the waters above where our immersed mailbox stood. As he returned to the house, weren't we surprised to see the long boats of the equestrian navy begin falling over the walls of the beaver dam? Soon the Navy tourists were fetching ponies and sheep out of the now rather unsociable-looking waters of Lake Sweet Apple. This, unfortunately, caused something of an international incident when one of the Navy longboats came too close to the territorial waters of the Milkshed Republic. The cows were apparently so incensed that they ejected the equestrian ambassador. Yep, they scooped the still sleeping form of Pinkie Pie up and tossed her right into the proverbial drink. I tried to call across my apologies, but Flossie wouldn't hear not one single word of it. I guess she was just using the whole episode to distract the citizens from the secession crisis the dance incident of the previous night was developing into. As our eyes followed the longboats, were we surprised to see that Caramel had not gone and left this mortal coil at all. Nope, he sat there atop the weather vane, wrapped firmly in the legs of the mother beaver. She cuddling him up into her girth. As she nuzzled him over and over and blushed with something approaching an indecent amount of satisfaction, a rather content look swept across her jowly features. Caramel, for his part, simply stared into the distance with deeply set vacant eyes, a 1,000-yard stare consuming him. He seemed, from our perspective, to be mouthing why, over and over. Overhead, the cry of only one Pegasus now erupted across the skies. As I looked up into the heavens, my good friend Rainbow Dash wailed over with a wild scream, diving with all her power and might into an amazing display of the magic of the Pegasi. She seemed determined to destroy the lingering form of the storm cloud. As she powered down into it, her voice full of rage, it was magnificent to behold. The very living power of an entire equestrian race flowing through her as she sought to free us from our woes. Of course, everything being what it is, the cloud chose that exact moment to simply evaporate of its own accord. This had the singular effect of making Dash go skipping across the surface of the lake like a stone, narrowly avoiding the longboats, the few remaining despondent ponies, and bobbling sheep as she went into a series of decreasing hops. At the far side of the lake, she thudded into the walls of the dam. This now had the further effect of making the forms of Twilight and Fluttershy, who had been lying there on their backs making tiny miserable sounds, Twilight from her inability to end the process, and Fluttershy from inadvertently witnessing Caramel's nocturnal misadventures, plop into the water as well. While the situation seemed to be improving, this still left us covered with a generally misplaced lake. I was more than a little crestfallen, Madam Mayor. If I were ever to be able to get the water out now, how long would I have to save my crops? Buckets, Madam Mayor. Hundreds, if not thousands of them. To my surprise and joy, to the whoops and hollers of all the Apple family and their friends there assembled on my porch, came the entirety of the population of Ponyville. 'Twas Spike and Angel, fierce and bitter foes and all other things, who came up first, leading the assemblage behind them. As they saw to Twilight and Fluttershy, they simultaneously and at the same time passed out buckets, pails, pots, and pans to all who came after them. Soon enough, some thousands of ponies were standing atop the dams, each one scooping and bailing. It were a sight to see, Madam Mayor. I'm sorry you weren't here to see it. Mighty sorry. Powerful sorry. You see, Madam Mayor, I had hoped that I could count on you to at least do something more than just send nice letters and forward your concerns on to some higher-ups. I had hoped you'd be, well, useful. The ground around the barns and milk shed has now returned. Though it is a touch muddy, it is still good to be able to walk from my porch to the barn. As I went over to inspect its remains, I caught sight of a very withdrawn-looking Caramel getting what Fluttershy would later tell me was the beaver equivalent of an "it ain't you, it's me," and "I hope we can still be friends, but please don't call me" speech from the mother beaver. Rambo and I have but reconciled, of course. She said she'd be happy to help me demolish the old barn once everything is dried out. This made Caramel rather happy. Turns out that as the waters began to decrease, the beavers began to reduce in size. 'Twas a sort of sympathetic relationship, or so I heard Twilight explaining. Spike had gotten her to swallow her pride and stand off to Princess Celestia for help. Within minutes, a couple of spells had arrived and the dams were already starting to come down. As they did, we all stood and saluted as the flag of the Milkshed Republic was lowered from Nancy's tail for the last time. I ain't looking forward to negotiations, but I'm glad the cows have voted for reunification with Sweet Apple Acres Farm and Marina, for as long as it's still a marina. Mayor Mare, I retrieved your last letter from the mud, the third one that inspired me to write you this last letter. It was startlingly like the first one you sent. Madam Mayor, I ain't gonna lie to you. I'd expected more from you. A fellow worth pony, the mayor of our city. You're a good pony, but at certain times there needs to be more than just fancy words and promises of help from someplace beyond. Sometimes, Madam Mayor, ponies need to get their hooves dirty. If rarity can come out here into the mud and muck, well, don't let me catch you thinking that your nice office up there is an excuse. To be blunt, Madam Mayor, what I'm looking for out of you at the moment you get this third iteration of my letter is a bailout. Literally, grab yourself a bucket and get down here to get bailing. There's plenty of water left, and when it comes down to clearing the mud, I expect your presence shortly. Or I may have to consider running for mayor myself. I have experiences dealing with foreign powers and everything now. How close do you think the vote would be? I look forward to seeing you here with us. Bring your waiters. Sincerely, Applejack, Proprietress, Sweet Apple Acres Farm, and not for much longer, Marina. P.S. Y'all no doubt noticed that I made right good use of my Old Earth Pony token in this letter, rather than equestrian proper. I did that so you'd know just how dang upset I am and how serious I take this all. I bet you one more thing for certain sure. You gone wet and read most of this letter in my voice?